Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Transportation and Environment Committee work session. Today, the committee will take up Bill 4621, the amendments to the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, and the I-270 Corridor Forward Plan. Colleagues, do you have any opening remarks, or should we jump in? Okay. Hearing none, I will pass it over to Ms. McCartney-Green for our first agenda item. Hi, Ludine.
Thank you, Chair Hucker, and good afternoon, Councilmember Glass and Councilmember Reamer. As you mentioned, Bill 4621 here for a work session. I do have with me today joining us Ms. Lindsay Shaw from DEP and Stephen Morrell from the Montgomery County Green Bank. We're also here to further the discussion on the amendments to the CPACE. And so I will begin with some just preliminary information, but DEP does have a short presentation, 10 minutes or so, and then we can jump into further discussion about any possible amendments. So Chair Hucker, just wanted to make sure if that was okay, or if we could.
Sure.
Okay. But with that being said, so the bill was introduced November 30th, 2021. A public hearing was held on January 11th with two speakers, both in support of the bill, and one of them was with the from the county executive. And so the county has already established a CPACE program back in 2015. With that, the CPACE program facilitates energy improvements and requires repayment through a surcharge on the owner's property tax bill. The state has actually amended the requirements and the allotment for what the county can do at the local level. And so with that, I'm going to ask Lindsay Shaw just to jump in here and to talk about some of the expansions that the state has done and how that's applicable to the county. And then I will further discussion.
Great. Thank you, Ludine. Thank you, Teenie, Chair Hucker, and committee members, Councilmember Glass and Reamer. I appreciate the opportunity to present here today. Just want to walk through very quickly. I think that everyone is pretty familiar with the CPACE program since it's been around since 2015, but just wanted to remind everyone that this allows for building owners to access private capital for building energy efficiency and renewable energy upgrades, including the structural changes that are needed to accommodate those upgrades. And that's repaid for on the property tax bill. It's a loan that's secured to the property. The loan term typically aligns with the project payback period, which can go out to 20 years. 20-year repayment history horizon is not typically seen in the private financial world, so this is a really nice financial product. The loan amounts are limited, so the building isn't over-leveraged with debt. And CPACE works really nicely alongside existing incentives and other financing structures for building owners to either reduce or eliminate those upfront costs. In Montgomery County, as Ludine mentioned, there was state enabling legislation allowing us to have a local level bill that was established in July of 2015. We opened up our doors for the program in April of 2016 at the Energy Summit, which some of you had attended. And our first project was completed in April 2017. We had a nice green ribbon cutting up in Gaithersburg. It was a really nice event. In that time, we've done 13 projects. That's $10 or so million of private capital in the county's private building stock. And we've had a pretty good success rate in terms of energy savings and relatedly greenhouse gas emission reductions from commercial buildings in the county. In 2021, our contract with our previous program administrator expired. We brought on the Montgomery County Green Bank to administer the CPACE financing program to fit alongside their other financing tools that I think that you all are very familiar with at this point. So just a quick run through of the amendments here of what's in Bill 4621. These are in response to modifications that were made at the state's enabling law for allowing us to have a CPACE program locally, as well as market feedback that the Green Bank did their homework before they became our administrator and helped propose some of these amendments where it's really needed to meet market demand. Some of those are changing what projects are actually eligible to apply for CPACE financing and be repaid for on the property tax bill. So it's expanding the scope of projects that are allowable. It allows for retroactive financing of projects. So these amendments allow for a 12-month retroactive look-back financing. So if you did an emergency CPACE replacement, that would be eligible for the CPACE program and you didn't happen to know about the CPACE program ahead of time, this allows you to apply for the program retroactively up to 12 months. We're looking at a new 5-year pilot program to test out what higher loan to value amounts would look like. Clarify some participation, a little lost in translation in the previous amendment. for new construction, allowing projects that meet and exceed code to take advantage in the new construction program, and then removing the county designated lender role from the initial program establishment. We'll get into why that's important in a minute. So our current CPACE program has a very heavily prescriptive list of eligible projects. There's kind of a catch-all at the end that says anything that reduces energy or expands renewable energy is eligible. This goes a step further. It aligns with what's in the state law for CPACE, including climate resiliency, climate adaptation, water resiliency, and environmental health and safety upgrades. So grid resiliency as well is included in that. So these amendments allow the CPACE program to be more flexible and just in terms of which programs can be accepted, as well as being responsive to our climate emergency. Talked a little bit about retroactive financing that's now permitted in the state law. There are 12 programs, state programs across the country that allow retroactive financing. The city of Baltimore also completed a retroactive financing project in 2021. So we're proposing a 12-month look-back period. Sometimes they go out to 3 years. We think 1 year is a good place to start. So this allows for a number of benefits that I'm particularly excited about. This allows for emergency building replacements. It allows people to still pick the more energy efficient option in a point of potentially crisis. If your, say, building doesn't have heating in the middle of winter, you're still able to say, well, maybe the CPACE program, I'm not going to be able to apply for the 10-day turnaround for an application. It's still a financing option available to me, which is really the big benefit here. But you can replace more expensive debt with less expensive debt, potentially having a longer repayment history, and of course attacks some of the equity issues that are persistent in the PACE program that typically Class A, well-resourced building owners have been able to access CPACE financing because they know about it. This allows more people into the door and making sure that just because they didn't know about a program right when they needed to access financing, that still allows them to participate in the CPACE program. We're looking at a pilot program here for higher loan-to-value amounts. Our current loan-to-value, which is how much of a CPACE loan you can take out relative to the assessed or appraised value of your building. That 20% number is on the lower end of other comparable programs in the country and locally. So this would allow for a 5-year pilot program to have larger project sizes, but the debt to value, the entire debt that you can leverage against the property remains fixed at 90%. So we're allowing larger CPACE projects to be accepted into the program, but we're still not going to have those buildings get close to being completely leveraged. So we want to make sure that that boundary is still in place. And we're hoping that these increased project sizes can drive down transaction costs, so it's easier to do more energy efficiency, renewable energy upgrades in buildings and have it cost less for the building owner when they're accessing that financing. A couple other clarifications. The new construction program required buildings to exceed code to access financing. We already have a built-in incentive that allows building owners, if they exceed code by more than 5% or more, you can access more CPACE financing that way. So this just says that if you are meeting code, you can still access CPACE financing. We have the International Green Construction Code in place. It's, folks are already installing sustainable features in their buildings, but we want to make sure that if they're still meeting our very forward-looking code in Montgomery County, that they're still able to access this program to help finance that. And lastly, the final amendment under consideration here to the CPACE program is removing the county designated lender role. This, in theory, when we started the program, was great because CPACE was brand new to the county. We needed help, and we needed a lender who understood CPACE financing. In reality, it was very confusing. We wanted to have an open lending model in CPACE where any building owner could come with any lender that they felt comfortable working with and still be able to participate in the program. But the presence of the county designated lender actually created some confusion in that market. Now that we have the Green Bank here with actively supporting the CPACE program, that role really isn't needed anymore. So to reduce confusion in the market and with the open lending model we want to have here, we think it's best to strike that role from the program itself just to reduce confusion. And that is it. That's an overview of the amendments here, and happy to turn it back over to Ludine or if any of the committee members have questions.
Can you elaborate on what does confusion in the market mean?
Confusion in the market. I can stop sharing my screen here so I can see all of you. Confusion in the market. So we had a number of lenders come forward to say, like, I don't understand how I can participate. You have a county designated lender. What do you mean you have an open program? You have someone who's like
Right.
sole focus is to fund projects in the CPACE program. Many private lenders didn't feel welcome in the program, even though we had an open model. So yeah, it did create some confusion. Some lenders just kind of wrote off our program because of the CDL role.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. So I don't yet fully understand some of the other elements of this. Do you have to approve the projects? Does the county have to approve the projects, or did the lender, whatever bank you were working with, have to approve the projects?
So if a project is CPACE eligible, that means that in order for that project to be repaid using the county's property tax bill collection process, it needed to meet a certain requirement of project type. So energy efficiency, renewable energy, water efficiency, those were generally the limited projects that were permitted, just in terms of following the CPACE law. So this then expands the types of eligible projects. So yes, the county does have a role in approving. The program manager would prepare an application with a private lender. There's nothing limiting that building owner from making any upgrade they want to, but in terms of using this financial tool, there are some limitations on the commercial property assessed clean energy program that you want to encourage building owners to use this tool with that longer repayment history for clean energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency type projects. Now this expands it to grid resiliency, climate resiliency, things that help the building adapt to climate change. So it just opens the program up, which is an exciting development.
It opens it up, but if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that the county has been very involved in the projects that got financed. Like we worked on with the application, we decided whether we think it's a good idea and so forth?
No, we weren't involved in the project origination. Which is where a building, sometimes they may have contacted us to say, would this be eligible for CPACE? And we would give them a yes or a no response. But I don't think that we're not there reviewing the project plans with them. We did have a program administrator that would bring projects to us, and the county would be the final sign off to say, yes, this meets the law. Yes, we will put it on the tax bill. But in terms of, consulting with the contractor and the building owner, we're not at that stage of the project development process.
Not involved in that, or whether it achieves a sufficient level of, environmental impact in order to meet our goals. We look at the end of the process. We kind of certify that that's a fact, but we're not terribly involved in how they might choose to get to that point.
Right. And one other thing I'll note is that our program doesn't have a savings to investment ratio. That ensures that whatever is being installed generates enough energy savings cost-wise to basically net the project out. So you're paying the amount on the loan that you're saving on energy. We don't have that requirement, and the majority of projects that have come through the CPACE program don't meet that requirement because they are end of life replacements for aging equipment that need to be replaced. We have had one or two projects go over that SIR requirement of 1, which means that it is generating more savings than they are paying back in the loan. And those were multi-ECM, very large, multi-million-dollar projects that were put in. So it's easier to meet that requirement.
And when you talk about 90% loan to value, so you're saying that the new allowance, we would allow a company to basically do a project that costs 90% of the value of the property, and then that's kind of the max that we would find.
Yes, right. So say
that's a lot of amount for an upgrade.
So the loan, the CPACE loan itself has its own boundary, so that you're not taking 90% of a building just for a CPACE project. So the 90% is all total debt against the property, including the mortgage or any other liens. So you can take out CPACE loans. So the CPACE requirements, the loan to value amount is slightly higher with these amendments. Right now, that would be capped at 20% of the project value.
Okay. Well, I guess I have the same question here I had on the Green Bank, which is how much of this funding is going to purchasing the new gas equipment?
Sure. In the past, we have not restricted the CPACE program from certain types of measures being installed, only because, as I mentioned in earlier slides, that this is all private funding. There's no county money being put forward towards the CPACE program, except in our staff time. So there's no county money being put into the CPACE program directly. So we've had a harder time restricting the project types necessarily.
I see. And that doesn't change as a result of the legislation we're taking up today.
No.
Okay.
It just has energy efficiency and clean energy projects, as well as other grid resiliency measures and environmental health and safety issues.
And what is generally speaking, like what's the interest rate that a project is able to get by using this tool versus what they can get in the market?
I'm going to let Steve Morrell with the Green Bank answer the percentage of financing question, but I will say the one benefit of the CPACE program is the very long repayment time horizon. So 20 years to repay a loan is something that you will likely not see in the private market.
Right, I would agree with and thank you for letting me join your session today. I would agree with what Lindsay is saying, that the 20-year repayment is the most important part to provide a longer amortization. On the aggressive side, I'd say we're seeing interest rates as low as 4.25%, between 4 and 4.5% fixed over 20 years, which is pretty aggressive. What's interesting from our perspective is that over the course of the next few years, the differential between CPACE and conventional loans is going to grow. The Fed has all of these rate hikes planned, and having that super senior position with the pari passu with tax assessments means that fixed rate can stay very low. And so CPACE should become even more attractive from that perspective. And so we've seen customers that say, 4.5%, that's great. I can almost get that from my bank. Why would I go through the process of getting CPACE? And that's, I think, a product of the fact that we've just been in a zero interest rate environment for so long. But CPACE will have even more of a differential moving forward.
Okay. And I guess maybe just out of curiosity then, how often are you funding projects that are installing new gas burning equipment?
In general, I do think that we had a number of boiler replacements. I just want to go back to make sure that I got this right. Boiler, chiller, hot water replacements. Some of them were natural gas fired. I remember asking very specifically if they were getting incentives from Washington Gas for them. So I do know that there were some fossil fuel systems that were installed. We have had one project install solar PV, which is exciting. A lot of them tend to do LED lighting upgrades along with the CPACE project. And we've seen a couple building envelope upgrades, which is nice to see because those are typically very expensive to do, especially if you're looking at window replacements or other air sealing measures in the commercial or multifamily building. So it's nice to have that 20-year repayment horizon. So yes, we have had some projects come forward with replacing end-of-life gas-fueled systems and putting in more efficient fossil-fueled systems.
And now, thank you, Lindsay. And now, so the Green Bank, it's great that Green Bank can be here to take this on. So Green Bank will have options for the property owner. They could take a loan through the Green Bank fund potentially, but it probably doesn't have 20-year, payback time, or they could do CPACE. So you'll work with clients on a case-by-case basis, I guess.
That's right.
We will. Sorry, I didn't mean
I just want, I'll tee up Steve. The reason that we wanted to work with the Green Bank to administer the CPACE program is because they have all these other offerings. CPACE isn't right for every building type. It's only for commercial or multifamily properties. It doesn't work for condominium units because of the individual ownership. They're technically a residential building. So having CPACE in the suite of offerings that the Green Bank has made so much more sense when we were working with a separate program administrator before, to have this financial program sit in line with all of the Green Bank's other financial products just made so much more sense. So a building owner can literally go to the Green Bank as a one-stop shop of, I need financing, I need help. Which product is the best fit for me?
Are we allowed to restrict the program from using gas burning equipment through the structure of state law?
I don't think there's anything that limits us in state law. It's an enabling law, so it doesn't say that we have to follow the state to the letter. It allows us to administer our own program as we see fit. So yes, if your proposal here is to amend such that the CPACE program can't finance fossil fuel fired equipment, there's nothing in state law that would limit us doing that. Although I think that there's an equity component there that I think came up during the Bill 4421 discussion. So just keep that in mind too.
In terms of?
Not all building owners can afford to electrify, and if we're restricting the financing products that are available to them, especially in light of other requirements potentially coming down the pike, like building performance standards, it might make it more challenging for those buildings to find products that fit their needs if electrification is too expensive.
If I could just add one piece here, I think that one of the benefits of looking at the Green Bank with that amendment regarding electrification is that we can take the time to prepare those studies, and that got baked in that, you know, over the course of the year, we're going to get more information to help inform this cost differential report and have everybody understand what it would cost to replace gas equipment versus do that electrification. And then, you know, we're entirely cut off. The private capital market is harder to find that kind of, voluntary participation in that market discovery. I think that they're a little more like woodland creatures who are easily scared off. And it's been a problem with actually some of the other features of CPACE. CPACE for new construction is the most, you know, fantastic thing in my view since sliced bread. You really get to replace mezzanine finance. And it hasn't been used because I think there was some lack of understanding that got fixed through prior amendments, but the industry is very fickle. We have, you know, great market feedback that these amendments here will really attract a lot of the capital providers, a lot of the energy performance contractors, but I don't think that we can easily find as much ability to study as we can find from the Green Bank on that cost differential. So it's just one added piece I wanted to make sure to add in terms of who we're attracting and what is their target market.
Okay. All right, I'll give that some more thought. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Steve or Lindsay, can you comment on, and you might need to pull up slide 2 or 3, but why there's so few projects?
That's a really good question, and I'm pleased to have the opportunity to answer it. In 2021, we shifted our program administration over to the Green Bank.
Right.
Prior to that, our program administrator, I would say, treated the program fairly reactively. Folks had to reach out to express interest. There wasn't as much proactive outreach and engagement being done with building owners that could use CPACE financing. So we know that the Green Bank is actively doing that work. So we expect the kind of measly 13 projects that we've seen grow pretty extensively under the Green Bank's management of this program day to day. So just in the past, I think that the CPACE law itself has been amended. Is this number 4? We've done a number of amendments on this program to continue to try to be responsive to market input and feedback. And there were just, I mean, Steve has mentioned the fickleness of financial providers just in terms of being particularly risk averse. And if they see a program changing constantly and they don't really know how it's going to affect them, then maybe they are going to stay away from it. Part of it is that we just are excited to work with the Green Bank on better outreach and education. I highly encourage anyone listening out at home to participate in one of the Green Bank's webinars, particularly for lenders, but they have fantastic webinars that they put on such great content. I don't think that there's any way that the CPACE program doesn't grow with their management.
I am a big fan of the Green Bank, and I'm glad we switched over that way. That happened in 2021. I'm sure there are constituents watching and wondering why it didn't happen earlier.
Sure, that's a really good question. The CPACE law and the Green Bank legislation were passed around the same time, but they were out of sync. CPACE was passed first, the Green Bank legislation was passed a little bit later. And I think it was former Councilmember Roger Berliner that said if those had been introduced in a different way, that it's very likely that the Green Bank would have been administering the CPACE program from day one. That wasn't the case. The Green Bank took a little while to get up and running. There was a work group process that was involved, and
Right.
establishing the Green Bank in general, it just took some time to get it right, and we're really happy that they're at a place where they are to do it. Part of this was that we did solicit a program administrator and a county designated lender, and those contracts ran through, I believe, to 2020. And we didn't rebid those contracts because we knew that we wanted to transfer ownership over to the Green Bank. So we had an administrator on board for a while helping us out. And so when that contractual relationship expired, we looked to the Green Bank. We set up a memorandum of understanding that they would be the administrator for the county CPACE program. So it took a while to get through COVID and also work on that MOU at the same time. A bit challenging.
So How was it affected by COVID? Everybody was working remotely, right?
Well, I had a baby. That was kind of a limiting factor.
That's different. No, and nobody filled in, right?
No.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of things going on as well. So we definitely had that at front of mind. We had this contract coming to a close that we wanted to make sure that we had an administrator in place. It just takes some administrative time to get MOUs worked out, and we got it worked out.
Right. Colleagues?
Well, I'll just jump in real quick. You and Councilmember Reamer addressed the questions that I had. I wanted to know more about the interplay regarding any of these financing projects and the energy resilience of them, right? And we've had this conversation with the Green Bank legislation, and I think it's important that we continue raising that, because there are only so many levers that we as local government have to try and enhance our building energy efficiency. Clearly, the BEPS conversation is ongoing, and I know that we'll be discussing that at some point in the near future. But in the meantime, the fact that we all keep bringing it up because our constituents are bringing it up because our planet keeps warming, we need to just keep addressing this. And so as we think through future programs and projects, or at least programs, however we can bring more of that into the conversation, I think is going to be really important, because right now you're right. The private market might not be interested in it, but we need to spur that interest, and whatever we can do to incentivize that, encourage it, is important. And then I appreciate the response regarding why few projects are in the queue. And I hope your baby is doing well during this COVID time. And that's all I got. So I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Great. Councilmember Reamer, do you still have a question? Your hand's still up, right?
Just a quick, Councilmember Glass kind of just reminded me, can you just share with us what the plan is on BEPS? When we'll be taking that up again?
I think it's on the schedule for the 14th, now that we have the Stephen Winter report. Is that right?
Yes.
Ms. McCartney-Green, great. Okay.
Yes.
Looking forward to it. I'm excited. Okay.
Chair Hucker, there is, I do want to address amendments that were made by OLL. And so kind of circling back to the packet, just on page 3, kind of went through 3 amendments that were proposed by OLL, and I'm on page 3 and kind of at the top of page 4 as well. The first amendment really was focusing on narrowing the inequities and whether or not there was an improvement for any amendments to improve the legislation. And so the first one that was proposed, and I'm looking at 3A, is to target CPACE investments in neighborhoods with the worst air and greenhouse gas emissions. And so this recommendation was used to mapping to identify vulnerable neighborhoods and measure the success of mitigation strategies to protect everyone in that area, design research and identify opportunity for targeting greenhouse gas reductions and reduce toxic air emissions in highly polluted neighborhoods. We talked about Bill 1621 and how that will play in terms of identifying and addressing the different building types and where they are. And so council staff, although agrees with OLL's approach, didn't believe that this was the specific legislation to adopt those amendments. And so there was no recommendation there by council staff.
You think, right. And we might want to have this discussion again when we take up the BEPS legislation, correct?
Correct.
Great.
Yep.
Okay.
The second option was
Any
to create
objections, colleagues?
sorry.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ms. McCartney-Green.
Sure. And the second recommendation by OLA was to create a certain percentage of CPACE financing exclusively for commercial buildings in equity emphasis areas. We talked about the restriction of the inability to restrict certain funding from Montgomery County Green Bank, just because it is not direct funding that we're getting. It's private sector that's playing a role in this. In addition, we've had some pushback and concern about the possibility of limiting those funds, and that the fact that that might be a violation of the 14th Amendment. And so for those reasons, council staff did not make a recommendation to include the equity emphasis area as a part of an amendment.
Okay.
And then lastly, we talked about outreach and education, and the realizing that obviously Greenback will now play a larger role with the commercial community and property owners. And so one of the amendments was to encourage commercial property owners to partner with minority business enterprise for CPACE investments, encouraging commercial property owners to seek out minority-owned businesses to deliver services, and partnering with minority vendors and business associations to be able to foster equitable economic development. And so council staff researched several local jurisdictions and looked at specifically Prince George's County that actually requires their property owners to use best efforts to use at least 35% of the total cost towards energy efficiency and clean energy improvements, with contracts that are based with minority business enterprise, local business, and county-based business. Council staff basically feels that that's a little bit too stringent for this program by requiring a certain percentage. And so instead, the recommendation here is the application that the Green Bank has to provide to the property owner, commercial property owner, that application should at least, have a way for a property owner to describe and certify that they've made best efforts to use a contractor that's MBE or use a contractor that's small business. And so I'm specifically looking on page 5, amending lines 166, where it says a property owner must describe and certify on an application submitted for review that best efforts will be used to contract with minority-owned business, county-based business for energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other approved climate-related improvements. Council staff will note that this really is just signing off on the application saying that efforts were used. There is no incentive there, and so that may be the disadvantage, right? What's the incentive to work with MBE if there aren't any further incentives provided?
Right. Did you speak to Prince George's about whether they have been able to satisfy the 35% requirement, and whether they've been able to find enough MBEs to comply with it?
I did not. So I was just looking at some of their local spending plan that they have. And so I do believe that they also have a small applicants as well that were qualifying for some of these CPACE programs as well. But I did not speak to them specifically concerning whether or not each property owner was meeting that standard.
Right. And there's no assessment of whether we have enough MBEs to satisfy something like that in Montgomery County, which is obviously different, right?
No, and we haven't discussed it yet, but my next amendment was to talk about what are the outreach efforts, and that we should have that included in our annual report that we receive from Montgomery Green Bank. And so that may be something for the committee to look at as well. Should we do a data collection of figuring out what information is being disseminated and what are we getting in the pipeline? And so that's the second recommendation from the committee, is to expand the annual report to include outreach efforts by the Montgomery Green Bank and what they're actually receiving in the pipeline.
Colleagues?
I just had a question about the small business best efforts. How is that defined? What would a project look to for guidance on that?
Great question. And so best efforts really is very loosely, right? It's not a mandate. It's not a requirement. And so the terms best efforts, good faiths, is really on the distinction of researching and looking and having an opportunity to outreach with partners. But to be honest, Councilman Reamer, like I said, this has teeth of putting
No,
in.
thank you. I think I understand, right? At the end of the day, I don't know if there really is any legal risk, but you're supposed to show best efforts, and perhaps there could be. I don't know, but I was sort of just interested in the local or small business. Where are those definitions? What counts as small business? I'm trying to imagine. Okay, you're a property owner, and you need to do all of this work. I don't know what this sector is like. I don't know what these companies are like, but what would count as small business, do you think? How would that property owner know what
Right. No, and
cutoffs are?
Right. And I'm going to ask Greenbank to speak a little bit on this, but looking at the Greenbank as being the program manager and looking on their website, was not able to find as many local businesses or contractors that were in the area. And so if we're going to use them as a program manager and to mitigate some of the inequities, the question was, is it available out there? And if it's available, then we can start to talk about more specifically what's best efforts. But it was hard to really define that and delineate that without even having that resources available through the Greenbank. And so this is a stab at trying to figure out how to mitigate that. But I don't think we have all the answers to as well. So I definitely understand the questions that you've posed, Councilmember Reamer.
Steve?
Main perspective, we do have a product that we list specifically for small businesses. It's one that we put out during the pandemic as a pandemic relief product. It has more flexibility than our hallmark energy efficiency product that's out there. But we use that.
I think if I'm understanding it correctly, what we're talking about here is when, let's say, a multifamily building or one of your commercial clients that has gained access to this, they would need to hire local businesses to do the work. Is that what you're referring to? Because I think that is what this amendment would do, is they would need to make a good faith effort to hire, minority or small or local businesses to do the work.
Right. So the point I was just making is that in that product, we define small business under the SBA terms, which is 500 employees or fewer. And that's not really helpful.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here. So.
Right. In terms of energy performance contractors, most of them would be considered actually small business.
That was kind of my question, are most of them already small businesses fundamentally? I mean, I would imagine that's kind of the industry at this point.
Right. I think that there are not significant shops unless they're tied to manufacturers of certain types of equipment. And there are energy performance contractors that are like that do fall under the big definition.
Carrier.
We do have an effort to try and work with as many local people as we can. Most of our installers, most of our contractors do happen to be local or have local channels that we work with. I think it's a fantastic idea to put educational resources. We can do webinars and outreach dedicated to small, minority, women-owned businesses and local as well. And I also agree that it may not necessarily be productive or find a good definitional way to add that from a further perspective, to say there must be a certain type of consistency across the CPACE volume within using these types of contractors. I agree with you. I don't know that the definition is necessarily that clear, but we can put a lot of educational resources and outreach into those.
And as the partner, you could create a directory of companies that do the work, and so that potential, projects that want to use the CPACE, they know that they're expected to make a good faith effort, and then you can provide them with a set of companies, and if they can pull from that, then that satisfies the goal. If those companies don't provide them with, they're not available, or for some reason the bids aren't proper, then they've made a good faith effort. Is that basically what it would be?
We could do that. We have a belief that a lot of the residents around, including commercial property owners, take a look at the contractors that we either work with or endorse as a trusted partner seal. And so we really are careful about who we're working with, and we do a lot of outreach to make sure that everybody knows of our programs and can get involved. in the program guidelines that we put together and got approved by the county, there's actually a contractor application form in there, and we look to, herald those contractors that sign up, and we put them up on the website. We make sure to advertise who they are. And so we definitely can make those outreach efforts and add to that list. I'm hoping we add to that list because it just means that there are more opportunities and more choices out there for people to work with.
All right. So this requirement would go to you, and you would essentially be an intermediary here. That would be, who would certify that? I mean, it's a self-certification by the applicant, right? So you're there as a resource for the applicants. And at the end of the day, it's a little bit unclear to me, if someone thought that a project hadn't made good faith efforts, what they would do precisely. But you would be a resource. You're not determining whether the project has made a good faith effort. You're actually not doing that.
Who is assessing whether they made a good faith effort? As we know, MBE requirements are the subject of games in almost every compliance area.
I think that's a question that goes to the dean under her formulation. It's a requirement that the applicant do it, but there isn't necessarily a certification that it has been done. It's a risk that the applicant takes that they can't prove that they've done that, right?
Yeah, and so that's what the difference with Prince George's County with the local spending plan. And so the recommendation was to not be as stringent as that, and the recommendation was just to list or describe the efforts, whether it's a directory that the applicant was able to go through, whether it was a webinar or some nature of that form. And so the recommendation here is not to be as stringent and implement a local spending plan and further certifications. But it was an effort to at least have it on the application for the property owner to certify themselves that they have at least tried to make that effort.
So the applicant knows they have to do it, and then the Greenbank is there as a resource to assist that they, provide references and so forth. Okay.
Is the chair with us? Oh, there he is.
Yeah, sorry. Contractors here, sorry. Any other questions, colleagues?
I hope they are local.
They are. And licensed and bonded. And MBE. Any other questions? Okay. Are we good with Ms. McCartney Green's recommendations?
There's one, if I understand it, there's one amendment she's recommending. Is that right?
There is one amendment concerning the property owner certifying best efforts. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Is that okay with everybody for now? If it doesn't work, we can always come back and tighten it up.
Right. Okay.
As a follow-up, just the second amendment was whether or not the annual report should include outreach efforts that are done by the program manager Greenbank. And so that was just to expand the reporting requirements so that the committee and the council can look at them.
So that's the second. I think we're okay with that too, colleagues, right? That's just a reporting requirement on outreach. Okay, I think we're good.
That's it, Councilmember Hooker, unless there is anything else from the committee.
I think we're fine. Okay, so on the amended bill, everybody's fine? Sounds like it. Okay, and Dr. Orland's here pushing us out the door. So thank you all so much. We have an amended bill. Thanks, Ms. Shaw. Thanks, Mr. Morrell. Very, very helpful. Thanks, Ms. McCartney Green, for a terrific packet. Okay, Dr. Orland.
Thank you. Really wasn't trying to push you out the door. We are dealing with two issues today, very closely related. One is the I-270 Corridor Forward Plan, and the other is a recommendation as to how to spend the toll revenue from the opportunity lanes in the I-270 corridor. The purpose of this work.
Glenn, when you say we're dealing with those two issues, do you mean that we're essentially taking up the capital budget, or that? No. Okay.
No. What I was about to say was that for both of those items, I think today is really for a discussion, understanding what the plan again is saying, what the public hearing testimony is saying, council staff is recommending, and having and finding out what questions you have, and then to come back at the T&E meeting on March the 9th, which you will be taking up the CIP again, including the mass transit projects, and then making a committee recommendation on corridor forward, but also on how to use the opportunity lanes money. It sort of fits nicely with reviewing transit projects.
If it materializes. Okay. And colleagues, how long do we want to go on this? Can we go till 3?
We could go a really long time, but we could 4 o'clock. I don't know. What would you recommend? I'm flexible here. 3:30. What? 4 o'clock.
Definitely at 4 o'clock.
Okay, that's fine. We're not voting today, right? This is a discussion.
It's just a discussion, and we're directing staff to do some more research. And we have the brass of the planning department here. Mr. Chairman and team, how are you? You look very tiny.
We're in far, far away land. Yes, we like it here in Wheaton, and we've run off the contractors.
You're tall of stature, but
can we? Would you mind if we showed you a few slides? Are you ready for that?
That's fine.
I think I want Justin McVeary to slide next to Jason there.
Okay, yeah, we'll bring the whole crew in here.
All right, now we're talking. All right,
Jesse. And
look, there's Carrie. Okay,
that looks like a lot of slides, but okay, go ahead.
Tanya and Carrie and Jason, the whole crew. That's right. Okay, so we thought that it would be useful to kind of review the bidding as to where we were on this as it relates to some of the things that were in your packet.
For sure.
Just as a reminder, the purpose of this plan was there are a whole bunch of different planned and hypothetical or proposed ideas about transit to improve accessibility along the I-270 corridor. Also, I think we want to just be very explicit that I think there's consensus that the CCT as originally conceived is not really tenable. The state has walked away from it. And really more fundamentally, the kind of land use that was expected to materialize in the life sciences, in Great Seneca life sciences area is not coming through in the way that was expected. It's coming. The good news is there's development applications. The bad news is there's much lower intensity projects. And so we will get more life sciences employment, but we're not getting the kind of projects that are going to put the number of people that were assumed that would justify the alignment that was proposed, which was not very efficient or cost effective to build and rather circuitous for other purposes. So that's led many, if not, certainly not everybody agrees with that, but I think there's something approaching a consensus that the CCT really needs to be reimagined. And of course, to the extent that some managed lanes toll revenue materializes, that's another opportunity to think about our transit priorities.
Okay,
So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can I?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear about the chair's comment there. My understanding is that the transit strategies that are being developed by DOT would provide full capacity for that area. And we would not need to, this has got really not necessarily anything to do with whether we think the development might still come to that area, because we think that we can actually meet the needs of that area in a new strategy. But
well, that's true. And I think you'll see later on in a couple slides, we'll get to this question of what's going on with DOT's Great Seneca transit network lines and how that fits into this.
Because I want to say, like, I do not want to head down a path of, we don't think the development's coming. That's why we're pulling back on a CCT. And then we start moving into, and now we're going to reduce the amount of development capacity. I mean, none of that is necessary. Like,
no, and that's not what we're suggesting. We're just saying it's not happening in the time that we thought and in the way that we thought. That doesn't mean that there's no life sciences related development happening and will happen in the future. But there is some a little bit of recalibration that's necessary to account for what the market is doing in that area. But I think you'll see when we show you this why it is. This is not an abandonment of life sciences employment in that area, but it's a recalibration of how we're going to approach that with transit both to serve that employment and those land uses and destinations, and also create a better transit project or set of projects for other purposes as well. So I think it's an opportunity to get a better version of the CCT. You could think of it as CCT 2.0, plus some additional transit services that DOT is working on, which will directly serve that life sciences area, and they fit together. So we can come back to that if you like, but I think it might be good to.
All right. So we're not. Yeah, we can get all that development capacity on the ground there. I am confident we can actually get that. The private sector will come there, but okay, thanks.
Okay. So our recommended transit network, I think we have confused the situation a little bit by using these new terms. We were trying to rebrand things a little bit, and unfortunately, I think that's caused some confusion. We are saying that an alternative to the CCT alignment, as it was originally conceived, is to build a BRT line on 355 as the backbone of a 270 transit facility with additional arms at the top, Germantown, Clarksburg area, and legs at the bottom, meaning Montgomery Village and around the life sciences area connecting to the Beers Mill corridor. So what we're talking about here is reconceptualizing the CCT in the alternative. Now, I'll come back to this. That doesn't mean abandoning all the CCT right away or anything like that, but it's a way of rethinking the CCT in order to provide a more constructible project, more cost-effective project, a project that serves equity goals more effectively, a project that serves the transit needs of additional destinations that were not contemplated by the CCT. And we hope you'll ultimately conclude, as we have, that it's actually a win-win because it's not walking away from the CCT. In fact, it's a better, more cost-effective, and more useful CCT. So the first priority is, as I said, the backbone is Maryland 355 BRT and Beers Mill Road BRT. The second priority, or to maybe put it a little bit different way, short to medium term as opposed to right away, is these corridor connectors, which are like the arms and legs off of the backbone. And then the third priority we'll talk about is Red Line extension to Germantown. So these corridor connectors, the first phase would be the southern connector that you see in blue at the sort of bottom right of the screen. And the idea here is to realign the CCT alignment to go from Montgomery Village through to the Kentlands, through the life sciences area, back to 355 and connect to Beers Mill Road. We think that is a more efficient option, both from in terms of cost and constructability. It avoids a couple of grade separation problems that are very expensive. It also creates a more efficient opportunity to provide service that's more efficient from the point of view of the user, being able to take a less circuitous route, and it connects some destinations that were not contemplated by the original CCT. Particularly Montgomery Village, we think is pretty exciting, and also allowing people in the Beers Mill corridor connect to that life sciences employment area is really good stuff. The Great Seneca Transit Network, and this is what you were alluding to, Councilmember Reamer, it provides connections between Shady Grove and the Life Sciences Center with a hub at USG. This set of lines, and I believe there's ultimately supposed to be 6 of them, and I think you may hear from DOT, I think they're pretty far along with a couple of them. They could take advantage of both the corridor connector in blue that you see there, as well as some of the right-of-way that's already dedicated or could be dedicated as part of the original CCT. They are not, in any case, in competition with this corridor connector, and DOT can speak for themselves, but I believe they agree that our corridor connector is complementary to what they're trying to do with those Great Seneca Transit Network bus lines. It also serves CCT stations that are not served by the Great Seneca Transit Network that DOT is talking about. MCDOT has maintained that the CCT remains long-term vision. I think, and again, they can speak for themselves, they're not saying that the Great Seneca Transit lines are a substitute for the CCT. So I don't think we're saying different things there. We're all on the same page on that. There are some issues in the memos about which could come first, master planning versus facility planning. And I don't really want to get too bogged down on this. We've been talking to DOT over the last couple of days. I think we're actually pretty close. We're just talking about how to characterize and articulate the relationship between some of those Great Seneca Transit Network lines and the corridor connectors, and to provide some flexibility and implementation for exactly how all these things are going to be rooted. But we think we can come to terms about that. We might want to take that conversation offline rather than try to resolve it today. And it sounds like, based on what Mr. Hucker said, you're not looking to make these decisions right this second in any event. I don't want to say it's the last priority, it's the longest term priority, is to consider the benefits of putting a red line extension to Germantown in our plans. We strongly believe that the red line extension to Germantown better serves the needs of Montgomery County residents, whatever the other merits of monorail or MARC or other concepts would be. It shortens commutes, it gets more riders, it links equity focus areas better. It's better for the environment in terms of reducing VMT and carbon emissions. And fundamentally, it just serves the existing and planned land use much more effectively than either MARC or buses on the interstate or monorail. So it's not at the expense of MARC. What we're saying is, over the long term, like 30 years or so, we should be looking at a red line extension, even though we acknowledge there's a lot of barriers to that. It's very early to even start talking about what that would mean in terms of where does money come from, that sort of thing. But we think that getting that into the plans today is important to have that option for down the road. And in the meantime, we're not dumping on MARC or abandoning MARC. What we're saying is incremental investments in MARC can make sense. We support those, but we think that a red line extension should be on the table, and it offers some long-term benefits that are just not available with some of the other ideas that have been advanced to this point. Last thing I'll say is this plan overall, all of it, the corridor connectors, the reconceptualization of the CCT, bus rapid transit as the backbone on 355, the extension of the red line to Germantown, all those much more effectively, demonstrably serve equity focus areas much better than the alternatives or the way that things have been conceived in the past. And we think that's another really good reason to rethink it. So that's what I have for right now. And of course, we're ready to take your questions, but I'm sure Glenn and others will want to weigh in.
That's right. Do you want to weigh in? Is that true?
Sure. I'd like to present the packet.
No, the chairman said Ms. Wright wants to weigh in.
Ms. Wright, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm just not in the same room as the group, but I affiliate myself with the presentation that was just made.
Of course.
Okay. Colleague, Mr. Reamer, sorry.
Look.
You have your hand up.
Sorry, that was from before. I've got plenty to say, but I will wait further into the meeting.
Okay. Dr. Orland.
Okay, just point out, well, I was going to point out other folks here at the meeting. We have DOT Director Conklin and his staff. Also, Jonathan Parker from WMATA is on this call. So the question for them, were they available, they may want to weigh in as well.
We have an embarrassment of riches. Director Conklin.
Sure, thank you. I just want to reiterate some of the things Chairman Anderson had said. I think there conceptually is a strong amount of agreement on elements of this plan, the backbone being BRT projects that have been in the planning process for quite some time. I think that makes sense. In one of the diagrams, there was a label that said infrastructure without access on the middle component of the CCT. I think that's a conclusion that's well-founded in the corridor forward plan. In terms of the Great Seneca transit network in comparison to these corridor connectors, clearly when we had introduced the Great Seneca transit network concept last year, and this committee and council advanced funding of the first two elements of that, it was not geared as a replacement of the CCT initially, and it was geared to work with the CCT as the backbone in this area for a long time, to be implemented in the longer term. I think that's consistent with what you heard from the planning department, planning chair. we start to differ when we get into the details of that connector and some of the elements and whether they could better align with other plans that are currently in place, or whether there are routings that might be just as advantageous as what has been drawn. So that's where the primary differences are in terms of the corridor connectors. In terms of the red line, we're less optimistic about the ability for that to be realized within the time frame of this plan than the planning department and planning board has been in their recommendations to you. And in terms of the MARC investments, there has been a lot of momentum in the state and the region about leveraging more from commuter rail. Clearly, MARC is also challenging, just as the red line is, but there are some benefits from that investment that are different than red line expansion, including access to the east side of the District of Columbia and some cross-county connections that are not directly possible just by extension of the WMATA system. I won't belabor the challenges with extension of the WMATA line. Jonathan is here if you have questions about that. But whether or not the current system as a whole can accommodate this extension, I think is a major question that's outstanding. Clearly, that idea is an idea that is appealing. It's an extension of a type of service that people in this region are very familiar with, and they can understand how it works and understand what an extension might mean. Our principal concern is that it may not be viable, so we may be hedging or placing our bets on something that can't be realized within any time frame that we're considering now. So again, not earth-shattering disagreements between the planning department and the comments the executive has submitted, which largely reflect those of this department. I think the principal area is this corridor connectors idea, which I think makes sense as a concept. The question is in the details, whether those details are at a level of certainty in this plan that you should adopt them as they're prescribed as written. So with that, Dr. Orland, I know, has a lot he wants to go through in the packet, but that's my introductory thoughts on this.
Well, not as much, because Chairman Anderson and Director Conklin addressed a lot of it. And again, Jonathan Parker's here when we talk about Metro. A couple things. First of all, yes, there's total agreement, as far as I can tell, with the idea of, I'll speak in more plain, effectively eliminating the Carter Cities Transitway as a continuous transitway in the master plan. So not to beat a dying horse, it just does not provide any kind of good service to Clarksburg or Germantown. No one will ever take these Carter Cities Transitway from there to Shady Grove, which is still a primary destination for trips up county, using for transit. So that's a good thing that this plan is basically saying goodbye to that. And replacing with a corridor connector concept's a very good one, because it can provide several different routes where buses can get a faster trip, whether it's BRT or just local buses. And because the research that was done into these connectors didn't have any kind of a real specific traffic analysis that was done, that's one of the reasons why I'm recommending that prior to memorializing these 6 routes as routes in the master plan, that DOT conduct a phase 1 facility planning study, not all of phase facility planning, just phase 1, which typically looks at traffic forecasts, traffic impacts, and winnows down the alternatives. It's not that these 6 necessarily are bad. In fact, probably most of them, maybe all of them are fine, but there are others that could also be added to this or supplant maybe 1 or 2 of these. And Mr. Conklin mentioned a couple of them. I've mentioned another one in terms of the Dorseno Road Bridge, which I think really will be built one of these days. There's no corridor connector there. And so the only way you can really get at this is to do this kind of facility planning study, because in past master plans, including the corridor, the BRT plan in 2013, there was traffic analysis that was done on specific routes, and that led to the decision that in some routes there would be 1 dedicated lane, some places 2 dedicated lanes, some places no dedicated lanes running in traffic. That was not done here. There was modeling that was done, and there was some good regional metrics, but not understanding what the traffic impact would be of, say, taking 2 lanes away from Goody Drive and having only 2 lanes for regular traffic, what will that do? So the plan, although identifies these routes, doesn't say whether the the dedicated bus lanes would be added or would be basically displaced general use lanes, repurposing them for dedicated lanes. And it would only take about 18 months. We don't have a cost estimate yet. DOT is still working on that. We'll hope to have that for the packet for your next meeting when you make decisions. But as a result of that, I'm recommending that the plan, although it can be approved to endorse the corridor connector concept, that it not include these 6 specific routes at this time. That once the study is done, that information, of course, will be shared with the planning board. The planning staff would be working with DOT on this the whole time anyway, and it would go back to the planning board for either an amendment to the plan, to either add to this system or to supplant some that are put in. Or another option is to frankly remand the plan to the planning board, not take action on this now, but again, wait for the study so the planning board could look at these results and send any revised recommendations at that point. The second area I want to talk about is the red line, and I'll be just perfectly blunt here. It's a fantasy. It will never happen.
Well, okay.
And I need to explain this. This kind of thing has come up before. It's a beautiful concept, but the cost estimate that was assumed that it would run at grade from Shady Grove most of the way to the Germantown Town Center, which means cutting off Railroad Street in Washington Grove, Summit Avenue in Gatesburg, Chestnut Street in Gaithersburg, essentially severing Old Town into 2, and then somehow rising out of a deep cut in Germantown and running at grade or elevated to Germantown, if I can finish the point. So the cost of that, using WMATA's unit cost, is not $1.5 to $2.5 billion, but it's at least $3 billion. And if on some other route we're taking, it'll be exponentially more than that. WMATA's proposal, or their comments, read them, and Mr. Parker's here, says that any kind of extension is not going to be a priority for decades, because their whole emphasis, and this has been for quite a while, is to bring the system in a state of good repair and to do over $5 billion of core improvements in the region. And that's in 2018 dollars. So it'll probably cost nearly twice that much by the time they do it all, which will go well beyond 2040, 2045. So, and finally, in terms of the metrics that WMATA uses for justifying extensions, even the long-term forecasts for growth around Old Town, around the station at either Metropolitan Grove or 124 or Germantown Town Center doesn't come close to meeting the requirements for an extension. Right. So better to use the resources for other things that could serve the corridor better and quicker. And I can get into more detail, but
yes, no,
I understand people want to jump in.
You can definitely get into more detail. I know, Dr. Orland, thank you. Councilmember, I know Rice has his camera on, but he doesn't have any expertise in this area. So let me call on Councilmember Reamer and then get back to Councilmember Rice really quickly.
Wow, there's so much going on right now. I mean, this feels like it's just a buffet of controversies and challenges. All right, I want to make a very general point here, which is I don't think the CCT is dead. I think it's a perfectly viable alternative. We may choose to proceed with some, investments that aren't with the CCT alignment precisely. But I think we should be careful about talking it down. And, I think it has its merits. I agree it's not an end-to-end system. But I am alarmed right now about what I'm not hearing, which is meeting the transportation needs of that area precisely in its future visioned development. And I'm concerned that the opener for this presentation was, we don't think that development's ever coming. Right. And that's not my understanding of what we're trying to do here. And so I want to be assured that any of these alternatives provide adequate capacity for future development in that part of the county, which is one of the cores of our life sciences cluster. And I think we've got a lot riding on that development capacity. We're going to do that Great Seneca, full plan revision. And so I don't know that we need to answer this right now, but I do want to say in very general way for this, I want to be really confident that whatever options we choose, we have full capacity for that area so that, development isn't halted, because of these choices. So that's, I think we need to spend some time on these corridor connectors. Generally, they seem very intriguing to me. Very big picture here. I'm very enthusiastic about the recommendation to proceed with 355 North and Beers Mill. These are both areas that aren't served by heavy transit and have really high transit ridership all the same. It's basically high levels of bus ridership. And I think that elevating that as our first and most immediate priority is a really critical breakthrough here. And so I want to compliment planning and MCDOT for their work together, coming up with that, approach. And it's in the capital budget. And I think it's going to be a really big win. And it, really helps to rebuild a lot of Rockville Pike to make it safer and more urbanized and more walkable and more transit focused. And I think that's what Up County, really needs from us, with Rockville Pike. So I think there's huge opportunities with the 355 and Veers Mill. I'm very intrigued by these corridor connectors. I mean, Montgomery Village would get a lot out of having a rapid connection into job centers. I mean, I think we know we've got some challenges in Montgomery Village. The future that was envisioned for that area hasn't precisely come to pass, and having it be strongly connected to big job centers would be a shot in the arm that I think would be really helpful. So, like, for example, I really like that idea. That sounds really intriguing. So I don't want to remove the CCT from the plan. I'm a little unclear as to whether there is a proposal to do that or not, but I don't want to remove the existing alignment. I'm very open to these corridor connectors. And, as far as the other issues are concerned, I feel like we're in a perilous moment for heavy rail generally, so I don't know when it's going to be viable to make multi-billion-dollar investments in Metro, in MARC, in monorail, in any of that, so I think we ought to be a little bit humble here about what we're actually doing because we don't know where things are going to be 3 years from now. Will people go from a 5-day commute like they used to have? Will they remain in a permanent 2-day commute? It's pretty hard to finance heavy rail expansion on 2-day-a-week commutes. So we've got some big challenges here. And I think we ought to be circumspect about how solid, we feel about how any of these projects could actually happen. But, I think they're all good. I mean, I'd like to see all of these proceed. And I don't see the point exactly in trying to bias one, but I think we should add the red line. I do think we should add that to our plan. I mean, if you don't have a vision, like you're never going to get there. And I don't see why there won't be some technology that makes it cheaper to build, or, whether maybe we have to re-envision the land use. Okay, let's do that. For both MARC and Metro, I think we have to revision the land use, frankly, to support the kind of investments that we're talking about. So I would urge us to, not drop MARC, but add Metro, keep them both in our sights. And I think the monorail idea to Frederick is worth exploring. So generally speaking, I'm kind of in favor of, most of the stuff that's before us. But if I thought that there was like an urgent need for us to pick between systems, then that would be one thing. But I don't see how there really is, and I think it'd be wiser to kind of just, have them now in front of us and start to work on them going forward. So that's very general observations here. But I like the plan a lot. I think that it's terrific. I hope we will have consensus on targeting our investments in the BRT on 355 and Veers Mill. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then proceed into more detailed planning for some of the corridor connectors. And then meanwhile, add the red line to our long-term strategy. Thank you.
If I may respond briefly, this is Carrie Sanders, Chief Mid-County Planning. Really appreciate Councilmember Reamer's comments. I think that in reality, I think we're all working toward the same goal, which is to greatly improve transit in the Mid-County and Up-County. I just wanted to make one sort of clarification that I think would be very helpful for the council members. I oversee the development review for the Mid-County, and I want to make sure everybody understands we're not, through this alignment, suggesting a reduced amount of development or changing the alignment of these corridor cities transitway to.
Harry, you're making a great point. Let me call on you, okay? Because we have council members waiting.
Okay.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yeah, good conversation, right? And it really is chicken or the egg in some circumspect. But the reality, I mean, I agree a lot with what Councilmember Reamer said, in that, quite frankly, we have to have some long-term vision and marry that with a practical reality of how to improve mobility in this part of the county. A visionary statement, a long-term goal has to be part of this conversation and has to be part of this plan. But then we need those elements of here and now and what can be done to mitigate the transportation system and the network in that area, mid and up county. And so clearly, I think BRT, true BRT on 355 starting Rockville North is fantastic, fully supportive of that, and also along Veers Mill, one of the most heaviest used corridors in the area. I am very intrigued by the corridor connectors. And the reason I'm intrigued by it is because I think it's akin to the Flex program, in that it really gets into certain communities, and I think it is much more nimble and a smaller system than, quite frankly, the heavy rail that we're talking about. And I do think that heavy rail is not in favor in national public policy or regional public policy anymore. So we have to figure out how to move people in the most efficient way. And these smaller systems, I think, are quite possibly the future. If not the future, they're the now, while we work on the future, going back to that long-term vision versus practical reality. I do know that the city of Gaithersburg has expressed some concerns regarding those the corridor connectors, because it doesn't adequately use the CCT right-of-way and doesn't really, I think, touch on the urbanist communities of Kentlands and downtown Crown. So something for us to improve upon, to figure out how those burgeoning communities that we want more of are connected to the transit. But I don't think we should throw out or ignore the corridor connectors. And then the red line, the state of WMATA is its own conversation. And so trying to work this into our long-term vision is a tough one, without a doubt. But I don't think we can take it off the table because it is, I think, very a shared common vision. And we have to figure it out. So, where is he? Dr. Orland, you were talking about the cost estimates and how one set of estimates doesn't marry with what I guess WMATA's cost estimates would be for other projects. Now that is taking into account the physical location that a red line would have to be extended on, but marrying a few other ideas that we've all talked about and that are at the top of our mind. What if this red line, this visionary red line extension, was not undergrounded with all of those costs that you in your, I think, secondary memo referred to, or original memo, I can't keep track right now, what if it was elevated like the Silver Line, which is much more akin to the other monorail idea that is out there too?
It's potentially, it certainly would be cheaper than if you underground it. The undergrounding part of it that I was talking about was only 2 miles of 7.8 miles. So if you elevate it in those sections, you've got some other kinds of community impact issues. We don't have much in the way of elevated metro rail in Montgomery County. The only place I think we really have it is around the Groveland area at the Cooks Hill interchange. But you'd be talking about doing elevated through Old Town Gaithersburg. Talking about elevated really once you get to Germantown, because it's in a cut right now, you'd have to start way back, way further south, and elevate it. Then you'd have to run it basically, I don't know, through neighborhoods or something, because there's no gentle curve that would take you from the CS line to the town center. Yeah. You can't just like follow Great Seneca Highway and make a 90-degree left turn.
So we could probably let the planners figure that. Those kind of things.
Right. Thank you. Right. I don't want to try and create the map here. But the reason I say that is I see our planners all raising their hands, eager to jump into this conversation. Because the most recent extension on the WMATA system is clearly the Silver Line, and there is a large portion of that is elevated. And so I think we need to look at what they're willing to do and how they're willing to do it. So undergrounding is, I think, by your memo, 10 times more expensive than at grade. So then clearly elevated would be somewhere in the middle. But I'd love to hear from our planners. I don't know, Ms. Wright or Chair Anderson all have their hands raised.
Ms. Wright?
Thank you. So I have the technical staff are going to make a couple of points. I just wanted to say one or two things very briefly, which is that any kind of additional transit that is along the CSX or Red Line track is going to be incredibly disruptive. If we look at really improving or increasing MARC transit, that's talking about a third rail in order for CSX to buy into it. And that runs through all the same places that Mr. Orland was just talking about, and has the same level of disruption and, affecting very important neighborhoods. So I think that, again, we do believe there needs to be a bigger vision for the idea of more heavy rail transit. And we think that the Red Line is the one out of all the things we looked at with MARC and the monorail and the Red Line, that seemed to be the one that actually served the people who needed it. Germantown cannot be underestimated. Germantown has 100,000 people. It is a city, and it does not have transit, and it needs serious transit. And so we really, really do have to think long-term. I was in Alexandria, Virginia this morning, and I saw the construction of the Potomac Yard sort of interim metro station. I will tell you that everyone thought that was pie in the sky. When it was first introduced, people thought it was crazy. It was never going to happen. I'm talking about when the first developments happened in Potomac Yard, not on the east side of the tracks, but on the west side of the tracks, that happened probably 20 years ago at this point. And those folks were all promised, you're going to have a metro station. And they said, it's pie in the sky. It's never going to happen. And it didn't look like it was going to happen for a long, long time. And those negotiations were extremely difficult. But there was a vision. So I want to just, again, pass it over to staff, because I know they have a few comments that they want to make, particularly about the traffic analyses that have been done.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass has a question. I want to get to him.
No, well, I still think I have the floor. So I'd love to hear from the planning staff.
Okay, great.
This is Carrie Sanders. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to speak a little louder.
You're fine.
Okay, great. So we do want to point out that the facility planning process is when the traffic analysis is usually done. With master plans, it's very atypical for us to do detailed traffic analysis. That is something that's done later. That is actually consistent with regional planning practices and national planning practices. That's not unique to Montgomery County.
And that's what we didn't do.
And that's what we have done with the 2013 BRT Transitway Plan. We did traffic analysis after that master plan was done. And we continue to do that. MCDOT continues to do that as they work on the BRT plan for 355. So I just want to make that clear that that is typically the way it's done, and we feel comfortable with that method.
Great. If I could just elaborate on that too, actually, Jason Sartori, Chief of Countywide Planning.
Great.
In that 2013 plan, there's 102 miles of BRT routes, and we only did detailed analysis of traffic analysis on 1.5 miles of that. So it's not accurate to suggest that we typically would, and that we did for the 2013 plan, that extensive analysis.
You did detailed analysis of 1.5 out of 103, is that correct?
102, yeah, 102.
102, okay.
Yeah.
So 1.5% roughly.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, and we acknowledge that during facility planning, changes might be, might transpire or come up, but that,
sure, we know.
For these types of plans, we would never put these things in our master plans if we had to do the feasibility or the facility studies first.
Okay.
So if I could just close out, I just want to re-up what Director Wright said, if I understood her correctly, in that any additional capacity added to the MARC line or an extension of the red line would run into some of the same geographic challenges. And so you'd have to then decide which one is the biggest bang for the buck, right? That provides our constituents with the best service to the most residents. Is that right?
They're
Yes.
both hard, and at some point you're going to have to confront those difficulties one way or the other.
Right. So long-term vision versus short-term practicality. I understand that not easy decisions, but I think it is really important to have that long-term vision. And as Director Wright said, I used to work in that part of Alexandria and remember many years ago when they were discussing where to locate that metro entrance and how it was going to happen. And I'm glad to learn and know that it is happening. Where there's a will, there's a way. So I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Rice, even though you're not on this committee and you lack familiarity with this area, please jump in.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate it and appreciate the indulgence, and really want to thank everyone for all of their comments that have been akin to ensuring that the level of service that we see in a lot of areas that are similar to what we see in the Up-County is one that's been incredibly lacking. And it is far cry time for us to make sure that we continue on a direction that's going to allow for folks to choose between hopping in cars, whether they're electric or gas powered, or hopping on mass transit options that can expediently get them to where they need to be. There is no question that in Germantown, anybody can drive from one of their Germantown neighborhoods to a MARC station, hop on the MARC train, ride that all the way down to Union Station, then hop on one of the transfer points and go to someplace else. The other challenge is that unfortunately, during that entire time frame, it'd be quicker for you to drive to a lot of those locations. And that is what folks are faced with. And until we have something that actually works, that allows for not only folks to make what we know is one of the better decisions when it comes to our environment around promoting mass transit, but also one that respects the quality of life that goes along with recognizing and respecting people's time. And so from that standpoint, that's what we're asking for when it comes to these types of decisions, understanding that just relegating the Up-County to being stuck in cars and in traffic and dealing with that daily grind is something that has to be there. It doesn't. And I will just say that while I agree with Dr. Orland that it's a harder pull for us when it comes to the red line. I will just say that that's what folks said about the ICC. I mean, folks said for a long time the ICC would never, ever get built. Period, point blank, end of story. I'm born and raised here in Montgomery County, so I remember back then when we were talking about the expansion of Lahill Road and folks were talking about the ICC. So I know, I've seen it in terms of where folks said it would never, ever happen. And lo and behold, ICC dumps right out at Lahill Road, not far from where I was born and raised. Imagine that. So it does happen, and I think that, again, it's important for us to look at those types of things that are much more, I think, far-fetched fairness. But who knows, with the right people and the right will that's in place could happen. But there are things that we can do right now to increase connectivity and make sure that we're addressing some of the challenges that people are facing right now. And that includes BRT, that includes CCT, and that includes this new idea around connectors. But it's really not that new because we've talked about this associated with CCT for a long time in terms of us really looking at the Great Seneca Science Corridor area and talking about how we would have fingers that would then go into some of the nodes. We've talked about these kinds of things before in terms of how to increase connectivity. So from that standpoint, I'm appreciative. I'm appreciative that folks are really thinking outside of the box and thinking about ways in which we can continue to grow connectivity and provide options for folks who haven't had them up until this point. We've only had one, not options, one. And so that is really something for me that I think is necessary for us. And so I support everything that I've heard my colleagues on T&E say, and that we've heard from planning as well. I think that this is the best direction for us to move forward in to make sure we're addressing the short, intermediate, and long-term goals of increasing options for the Up-County when it comes to mass transit. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence. I'm not going to belabor the point, but just wanted to be able to chime in here.
Okay, colleagues are nodding. I mean, where I am, we have so much expertise in the room. As I said, it's an embarrassment of riches. But none of us have, I think all of our crystal balls are equally flawed, especially where we're called on to predict political changes in the future. Most expert observers didn't think we would have a Republican governor in Virginia at this point. And that's a big challenge for us in terms of getting something through the WMATA board, unless there's a deal that benefits Virginia as well. I believe nobody here is opposed to any of this, and I would love to see all of it. But any of these options are going to be very expensive and disruptive, and our long-term vision is really critical. And today, I think we're only having a prioritization exercise. So I also, it hasn't been mentioned, but I think the monorail deserves some future study. Dr. Orland mentioned that we don't have much elevated rail in Montgomery County, but that's to our detriment. I mean, it works well in Chicago and New York and elsewhere around the world. And I would think the benefits would be even more economical in suburban areas with high land values like Montgomery County. So I think that deserves some future study as well. But most of these decisions will, require political support. And none of us know whether we're going to have more support in Virginia or on the WMATA board before we have more support from the governor's office for an expansion of MARC. We could lay bets, but none of us, really know at this point. So we can talk about what the Up-County needs, but I think the Up-County would be happy with a lot of these options compared to more of the same. So I've talked to MTA and CSX and Amtrak and the locomotive engineers union and all kinds of stakeholders, and nobody seems to have a better crystal ball. So, to me, if we don't need to do anything today, and this isn't a budget discussion, I'd prefer to be open to everything. I think DOT and the planning department and the commission aren't very far apart, and they should probably continue to talk and give us a range of options that we can consider in the future as we get closer to knowing what our options really are. So I don't know if anybody disagrees with that. You should let me know. Dr. Orland, your hand is up. I want to call on you, but that's where I am. I just think this needs a little further study and discussion. Thank you,
I'm not
Councilmember
totally
Rice.
sure I know what you mean exactly, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Yes.
Yeah, sure, Dr. Orland.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond to a couple of things, but also ask the committee where it wants to go generally. Just in response, in terms of the arguments of, Ms. Wright mentioned the Potomac Yard station, and there was also the NOMA station that was built. Both of those are on existing lines. I mean, there was no right-of-way that was needed for Metro. It existed there. So if folks were saying that it wasn't possible to do it, they were probably they were probably exaggerating, frankly, or didn't think the property was available or whatever. It was always possible, and it's always possible to do other intermediate stations. I mean, this council in the Shady Grove plan said there should be a future station on the Red Line at Montgomery College. That's possible. I'm not sure if it's wise, but it is possible, and it's in the plan as a long-term idea. This is different. This is a place where a right-of-way doesn't exist. And to Mr. Rice's point, the Intercounty Connector right-of-way has existed, 300-foot wide right-of-way, has existed since the early 70s. The eastern part of it from Lay Hill Road East since the early 50s. So there's always the possibility to be able to build the ICC. A lot of folks didn't want it to happen for good reasons or for bad reasons, but it was controversial. But because the right-of-way was there, it was eminently feasible, and it always had been. In terms of what Mr. Sartori said about the 2013 plan, I remember specifically that there was actually forecast for traffic along each of the routes, and frankly, in just about every master plan that I've covered them all at the council for the last more than 30 years, and even before that was with DOT. There was always a traffic analysis that was done. Even in, for example, in the Wheaton plan, there was modeling trying to figure out how many turn lanes you needed at intersections. So the fact that this wasn't done here is really a missing piece of information, which will determine whether or not these specific routes are the right set or not. But finally, I want to get back to the larger point of like, what are we doing in this plan? The planning board's purpose, and Mr. Anderson pointed this out very early in his presentation, was there are all these ideas for providing transit in the Up County. And the purpose of this plan was to prioritize them, say, these are the ones we're going to go forward with. These other ones, they're going to take sort of a back seat. But in the comments I've heard from the committee members, I don't hear much about things going into the back seat. I mean, it's all about picking which ones you want to move forward with. Does the red line extension then mean not pursuing MARC? Not pursuing monorail? Do you not pursue express bus service on 270? You just want to continue to have all the above. I mean, this is the basic reason why this plan is put together, was to try to actually winnow down the number of options to something that's truly unaffordable, to try to do everything, to something which is, at least in the long term, manageable. So I'm just, again, you all have a couple weeks to think about this, but I think when you come together on March 9th, right, if you can make really specific prioritization of which ones are going to go forward, which ones either are not, or at least take very much of a back seat, that's going to be really, really critical for this. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
So, Dr. Orland, so what do we have to decide today? Is there anything you see? We're all coming back on March 9th.
Well, there's one more
direction.
Yeah. I'm sorry. There's one more issue we didn't bring up, which is the use of the opportunity lanes money.
Right. And
I could just cover that really quickly.
Well, but on this topic though.
No. And again, the point was to have this discussion, to have Q&A. If there's any specific information that any of the committee members want to be developed between now and then, tell us what that is.
We'll reach out. Yeah, sure.
Right. But remember, the packet is due like middle part of next week, so it's don't wait too long. If you wouldn't mind.
Well, yeah. The packet's at the service of the council members, so we'll let you know what we need. Councilmember Reamer.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So first of all, I do think we need to get to the opportunity lanes funding, and I think we have a consensus vision here with a recommendation from the county executive, which I strongly support. But before we get to that, all of these master plan questions, I just repeat what I've said here so far. I think it's really hard for us. I mean, even in the course of preparing this packet, we have received 100% difference in cost estimates for the proposed red line. You know, we have a $1.6 billion estimate, we have a $3 billion estimate. We can't actually make a decision about how to prioritize.
We have no idea.
With things like we all really don't know. So secondly, I think this is a really tough time for us to actually make decisions about heavy rail. You know, heavy rail ridership is taking a far bigger hit than automobile transportation. A lot of people are shifting to a 2-day-a-week commute. And they're saying, well, if it's only 2 days, I'm just going to drive. And that is, metro ridership is down like 40%. It's there's a crisis. The system is like literally in a crisis. And without massive federal subsidies, you know, service is going to have to be cut. I mean, we heard during testimony that MARC ridership is down to 25% of its former ridership level. That's like staggering. Without major additional funding subsidies, we can't even maintain the status quo. So there's no point in pretending that we're actually deciding on what any of these infrastructure investments truly are going to be. And I would not want to remove MARC or imply that we aren't bullish on that potential. I would not want, I think we should support the red line extension. I also see in this that either of those clearly needs a different land use strategy, because you got to have a lot more development around either MARC or the red line in order to help finance, you know, the kind of infrastructure investments that we're talking about. So I would say if we are going to add the red line, which I strongly think downtown Germantown would absolutely benefit from having the red line terminate there, we would then say, well, over the next couple, 10, 20 years, we're going to have to figure out a completely enhanced vision of how Germantown is going to look in order to support that. And like, that's fine. That's a great conversation to have. And we don't need to think about whether we're deciding that now. So I would really like to see us put that on the board and, try to figure it out. It's worth developing slowly and, keep MARC squarely in our sights. There's tremendous statewide momentum that seems to be building. Whether all of this pandemic inspired behavior change, what impact that will have, we don't know. Right. And then I like these corridor connectors. And, they're not going to happen overnight either, but there is some specific question here. Planning wants to put the corridor connectors on the master plan, but it's not, it appears to me that there's no specificity about where there is dedicated lanes or not. And that's okay with me. I'm not saying there should be specificity about it, but as long as that's the case, I don't know that I see the development impacts, Glenn, that you're talking about, because it's not, we aren't clear yet what exactly we're doing. There's a lot more planning that has to go into thinking about how we would implement those. So if I'm correct about that, I don't see the harm in putting those corridor connectors, and I do see some harm if we don't follow through, because then we'll never get started on that. Go ahead.
Sorry, did you want to respond, or I can...
Yeah, I want you to, Glenn, if you could, we'll go to planning.
Yeah. The idea of the master plan is to preserve right-of-way.
Right.
The decision about whether you add lanes for dedicated lanes or repurpose them, the plan says for these 6 routes there will be dedicated lanes. The question is how to do it.
Does it mean the entire length of the route, though? It doesn't necessarily mean.
Well, that's what it would call for. Now, but the facility planning study could then, yes, it could change that. It could say no, it's not viable there. Instead, we have to add lanes, or maybe not do them at all, or maybe do queue jumpers.
Right. So we're not making a total commitment here if we embrace this vision.
But it makes a difference in terms of whether or not right-of-way has to be dedicated.
But the planning board's not going to make a property provide right-of-way for something that they don't think is likely to happen, right?
Well, if the development's happening between now and the time the facility planning is done, what does the planning board do?
Figure it out.
Yeah, so it's, that's why it's, I'm not quite sure what the rush here. But is the planning board did say that, and they pointed out, and they're right, that facility planning has to happen before these things get implemented. So why not do the phase one facility planning, do that first before you memorialize it in the plan, and you don't do the rest of the design stuff till later anyway. And this way you're sure about the routes that you really think are the best set, and maybe these and maybe more.
Yep. That was a quick answer. Okay, Councilmember Glass.
Yeah, so I just want to re-up again the comments I think Councilmember Reamer just made, or the comments he did make, that we just need to be ready for whatever the environments might be in order to build whatever system we can. Whether it is federal infusion into WMATA, which I think has to come at some point in time just because of the ridership, even though the federal government is starting to return, just as the council is starting to return in a few weeks. And then also the move in Annapolis to expand MARC. There are some state senators and delegates who are doing incredible work to expand that system. And if they are able to provide some state money for us to do that, then we just need to be ready for it. And so I think again, we just have to be ready. And adding one more element, which was alluded to some point ago, the managed lanes, which is now back in court. And so what are we, how are we hedging our bets there? And the answer, at least with that, even though it is back in court and there's a gubernatorial election, is that the assumptions are baked into, if not this, most certainly the CIP. And so we've made that calculated decision to incorporate that project into future plans, despite it not being 100% certain. And I think that is the approach we quite frankly need to take here. We need to just be ready to jump at whatever opportunities come at us and do what we can. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director Conklin.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about the connectors again. There was a lot of discussion of traffic analysis. I don't want to overemphasize traffic analysis in this conversation because I don't think that's where the disagreement really lies here. I think it's a broader question about some of the specific corridors that are identified. And as council staff mentioned, whether we add to what's here or we swap one for another and what's here. And I think that's the conversation that we could continue to have with the planning department staff to see if we can create better alignment between both some expectations that we have about which of those makes the most sense, and two, some better alignment with those in some places where the existing planning and design work is already happening, so that we get more bang for the buck out of the recommendations and create that alignment. I think that's something that we can work on. I don't know that we will get to a conclusion on that before you need to take action on this plan, but it might reduce the number of choices or difficulty of choices the committee and council is asked to make.
Great. Councilmember Glass?
Sorry.
Your hand is still up.
Councilmember, do you mind just saying that again? Can you summarize that again, please? I'm sorry.
Let me use some examples because it might be easier. We had done some looking at a quote corridor connector, not with that name, but for a service concept that was relying on Muddy Branch Road. The corridor connector is on Maryland 124. I think through some conversation, we can figure out whether we're adding one or swapping one or what we're doing with that. And that same sort of thing exists on many of these corridors.
So
I think when Glenn is talking about, sorry, Chris, are you saying that the Great Seneca Transit Network that you're envisioning, there's some potential duplication really with the corridor connectors? Is that what you're saying? And yeah, we could try to resolve those. Yes,
resolve
and reduce some of the confusion. Because like I mentioned at the outset, I don't think the concept is where we're struggling. It's the details and the specific locations for some of these decisions. And I think we can work with planning staff to try to reduce the number of those while you're working on this plan at the council.
And I just want to make a very brief comment here on the point of the opportunity lanes funding. I mean, if it doesn't materialize, then it doesn't materialize. I mean, we're not spending the money until we get it. And so sort of neither here nor there. The CIP has a recommendation for using this funding plus federal grants. Neither of those are in our hand. But if they don't come to pass, then we can't build the project. There's not like there's some other funding source that we're passing on. It's all new funding that we would use.
Right. As long as the public understands that. Chairman Anderson.
Yeah, I want to thoroughly agree with what Chris Conklin said. I think it's consistent with what you said and what actually the whole T&E committee said, which is you have two, I think, decisions. One is how to characterize all these far up county projects, MARC versus Red Line, monorail, et cetera. And the second decision is what to do about the order of what should happen when with these corridor connectors and the details. Yeah. I think if you send us back to work with DOT, we will try to at least narrow and clarify your choices and hopefully come to a meeting of the minds, and we can wrap that up for you in a package, ideally. But either way, I am confident that we can work with Chris and his team and bring this back to you in a place that's a little bit easier to get your minds around what's the issue to be framed for your decision.
By March 9th or not?
I think you sure. Yes.
Great. Okay. Yes. I mean, we're over time, and my patron's Thomas Aquinas, and he never answered how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. So I really don't think we should spend all afternoon discussing how to spend money that we don't have. So anyway, we have such expertise in the room. I would love you, Chairman Anderson, and your expert team to get in touch with Director Conklin and his expert team and just give us some clearer guidance. That would be a better use of council members' time.
Can I go to the other issue? And there'll be 2 minutes, and then I'll be done. This is the opportunity lanes funding, like how to use it. The executive is recommending, as you probably know, using $170 million. There's $300 million. Sorry, there's $60 million we're going to get within the year or a year and a half, depending on how long this lawsuit goes. And the other $300 million we spread out over a number of years. DOT calculates, or OMB and finance calculate that in net present value terms, that $300 million really translates to about $100 million because of the payouts would be over 50 years and the net present value of 5%. My only point here is that, and the math works in that respect.
Yeah.
And they're using it for the part of the cost of the 355 Central BRT, for part of the cost of the Beersman Road BRT, and for designing the northern and southern sections of the 355 BRT. My only point is, in the analysis there in the packet, that if you look at possibly getting the state to agree to pay back that amount, maybe over 40 years rather than 50, and that if we can go with a slightly less conservative discount rate of 4.5%, that would generate another $28 million in net present value, which would be more than enough to pay for the cost of the Metro State, the White Flint North Metro Station. We're missing 3/4 of that. So it's just a matter of, there's nothing we're going to have an answer on the next few days, a couple months, but it's something that can be worked on within the next year, because the White Flint Station, for example, is the first year of design is not until FY24. So just to keep that as an open option. But otherwise, I agree with what the executive is recommending there.
Okay. No objections? Anybody? Councilmember?
Thank you. I'd just like to add here. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out the financing and all these arrangements. I mean, that funding could be bonded. And to your point, Glenn, like the terms of repayment could have a huge impact. But I think we're a long way from knowing how this could actually work. I mean, Secretary Slater had said that the state could capture the funding, and then the state could use the trust fund to put all the funding on the table for a much larger project than, what we're talking about here. And of course, they're still
not around anymore. So
right. Well, but I'm sure our powerful county executive and delegation can work together with our council to secure that funding. There's plenty of options. If the project is indeed moving forward, there are plenty of options that are presented financially. And so we do need to have all of those conversations. And Glenn has pointed to some of the potential, wrinkles that could work out one way or the other. I think there are probably a lot more than just that. So again, I think, DOT needs to be at the table, and we're trying to get this task force convened with the state and the county and get this kind of stuff hammered out.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll come back to this on March 9th.
Sounds good. All right. With that, everybody, we're adjourned. Thank you so much.
Spring Road from August 30th, 2021 through early June 2022. Due to utility construction project,